When a mall security guard saw a terrified little girl with a suspicious-looking man, he initially passed it off as a young child's emotions getting the better of her. However, after the pattern repeated itself, he decided to investigate, uncovering a sinister and evil operation that had been hiding in plain sight. He would do anything to save that little girl and found himself locked in a race against time to protect her. This was a story of bravery, resilience, and the relentless fight for justice. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe the truth should always come to light, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Jason Hale, a 31-year-old mall security guard, had been working at Westfield Mall for just a few weeks. He had taken the job hoping for stability after a long stretch of financial uncertainty. Jason was not from the city. He had grown up in a smaller town a few hours away, where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. When he moved away, he thought he would find opportunity, anonymity, and a chance to prove himself. Instead, he discovered crowded streets that never slept and an endless current of strangers rushing past one another without a second glance. He kept to himself, cautious not to get in anyone's way. The mall, with its polished floors, neon signs, and constant chatter, provided him a steady paycheck and a small sense of routine. It was a late afternoon when he first noticed a man in the charcoal gray jacket. The air conditioning in the mall was humming at a steady pitch, creating a low background noise that matched the hum of conversation, the clicks of high heels, and the squeaks of sneakers. A large poster for a summer sale hung near the entrance of a children's clothing store. Families were milling about, clutching shopping bags, and kids seemed restless as they were dragged from store to store. Jason was standing near the electronics shop, scanning the crowd out of habit, not expecting much beyond the usual petty mischief. He saw the girl first, Mia. She could not have been more than 7 or 8 years old, her hair braided in 2 short plaits that hung near her shoulders. She had wide, fearful eyes that darted around as though she were searching for someone who wasn't there. Her clothes looked a bit rumpled, as if she had been wearing them all day. Clinging to her side was a tall man in a charcoal gray jacket. His posture struck Jason as odd, but he couldn't pinpoint exactly why. The man didn't appear aggressive in the way one might expect an abductor to be, and yet, something in his gaze felt off. He spoke quietly to the child, leaning down to murmur in her ear. For a moment, Jason wondered if the little girl had become upset over a trivial matter. Perhaps she was tired, or they had been shopping too long, or she simply wanted a toy she wasn't allowed to have. But as Jason inched closer, as discreetly as possible, he noticed the girl's eyes. They were brimming with fear, tears threatening to spill over. Even more telling was the way she kept looking at the man, not with the annoyance of a child scolded by her parent, but with a silent, desperate plea for help. The man, in turn, squeezed her shoulder whenever she tried to move even slightly away from him. "Is everything all right here?" Jason asked, making sure his tone sounded polite. He did not want to escalate a situation that could simply be a family disagreement. He put on the official yet friendly smile that he had learned to perfect during his first weeks on the job. The man straightened up, gave a curt nod, and responded, "It's fine. She's just a bit upset right now." His voice was calm, almost too calm. He reached into his pocket and pulled out some papers. "I'm her legal guardian," he continued, handing Jason a sheet that looked like some form of custody documentation. "We're just going through a rough patch." Jason glanced at the document, noticing the official seals and signatures. Everything appeared legitimate, at least at a quick glance. Jason forced himself to check the name. It read Marcus R. According to the papers, he indeed had legal rights over the child known as Mia. Jason felt uncomfortable pressing further. He looked at Mia again. She offered him no words, just that same frightened look, as though she were trying to communicate something her trembling lips could not say aloud. "All right," Jason said carefully. "I just wanted to be sure you were both okay." He tried one more time to catch the girl's eye, hoping she might speak, but she only clutched the man's jacket sleeve, her small fingers tight against the fabric. "Appreciate your concern," the man replied. He pocketed the documents and guided Mia swiftly down the corridor, disappearing into the crowd. Jason stood there for a moment, the sense of fried pretzels and sweet pastries mingling in the air around him. A prickly feeling of unease worked its way up his spine, but without any concrete reason to intervene, he had to let them go. He told himself it was probably a misunderstanding, or if there was tension, it might be a private matter that had an explanation. Yet the look in Mia's eyes haunted him for the rest of his shift. He tried talking to his immediate supervisor, Valerie, about the encounter. Valerie was a no-nonsense woman in her mid-40s, someone who believed strictly in protocol. She wore her hair in a tight bun and never seemed to slow down. Her phone was always in her hand, receiving updates about lost children, shoplifting attempts, or general safety measures. She listened with pursed lips, a frown forming, but she shook her head. "Jason," she said firmly, "I understand you're worried, but the man presented custody documents, right? You did the correct thing in asking for proof, and he provided it. If you keep pushing this without evidence, it's going to look like harassment. The last thing we need is a complaint that we're targeting an innocent guardian." Jason swallowed his concern. He understood the logic. He was still new, after all, and the last thing he wanted to do was jeopardize his job by becoming too paranoid. Nevertheless, the more he tried to convince himself that everything was fine, the more he felt the gnawing sensation that something was terribly wrong. Days turned into a week, and Jason fell into the routine of the job. He patrolled the sprawling floors, checked the back corridors, responded to minor disputes, and sometimes lent a hand with crowd control during store promotions. Westfield Mall was a maze of clothing boutiques, electronics shops, jewelry stands, restaurants, and a large food court that always bustled during lunch and dinner hours. In the evenings, teenagers would hang out near the arcade or cinema, giggling and showing off to one another. Families shopped for groceries in the supermarket attached at the far end. It was a self-contained world, one where faces blurred together unless you made a conscious effort to remember them. But Jason did make an effort, especially after that unsettling incident. He studied the crowds more attentively, focusing on small details: a parent's uneasy glance, a child's unusual silence, strangers exchanging hushed words in an otherwise open space. He started to notice patterns. Now and then, he saw children escorted by adults who weren't paying much attention to them, or couples passing young kids to each other without a greeting or sign of affection. In one instance, he thought he recognized the same boy, on different days, with two entirely different pairs of adults. He tried to rationalize it as maybe an extended family situation, an aunt or uncle taking care of the kid perhaps, but the seed of suspicion had been planted. A few nights later, while Jason was taking one of his routine tours around the perimeter of the mall, he saw a black SUV parked near a side exit that was usually reserved for deliveries and staff use. It had tinted windows, preventing him from seeing who was inside. At first, he figured it might belong to one of the mall employees who preferred a quiet spot away from the main parking area. But then he noticed the vehicle idling there for an unusually long time. He strolled closer, trying not to look too obvious, but as he approached, the SUV's engine revved, and it drove off. The next evening, around the same time, he found the same SUV in roughly the same spot, again with the engine running. This time, the driver sped away the moment Jason turned the corner. No license plate was visible from the angle he managed to see. Either the plate was obscured, or the darkness simply masked it. Once might have been coincidence, but twice made him uneasy. He wondered if it could be connected to the strange behavior he had been noticing. He approached Valerie with these observations, careful to present them as facts rather than paranoia. She sighed. "Look, I appreciate your diligence, but as far as I can tell, there's nothing to report. A black SUV idling in the loading zone is suspicious, yes, but until you have more than that, we can't do much. Keep an eye on it, and if you see someone actually breaking the law, notify mall management or the authorities." Jason nodded, feeling both stifled and uncertain. He understood the constraints of his position, but it frustrated him that he had to wait for something overtly criminal when his instincts kept telling him something was brewing behind the scenes. He decided he would continue to watch quietly, see if any patterns emerged that would give him grounds to take more decisive action. A few more days passed, and during those days he began to observe suspicious handoffs in the corridors. He would see a child with one adult in the morning and then with another adult in the afternoon, with no clear explanation for why the handover took place in a tucked-away corner or outside a seemingly random store. Usually, children clung to parents or guardians for comfort, but some of these kids appeared either frightened or oddly detached. Even more peculiar was how quickly these pairs disappeared as soon as someone like Jason came into view. He would turn a corner and see a child stepping away from one adult and into the care of another, then watch both adults slip into the crowd as if they were trying to avoid drawing attention. One evening, near the end of his shift, a man named Daniel Cross approached Jason in the food court. Daniel, a worried-looking father in his late 30s, had a phone in his hand. He hesitated for a moment, glancing around as though he feared being overheard. Then he said, "Are you one of the security guards here?" Jason noticed the anxious look in Daniel's eyes. "Yes, I am," Jason replied. "Is there something I can help you with?" Daniel exhaled shakily, as though he had finally found someone who might listen. "I took some footage on my phone," he said, "the other night in the parking lot. I was leaving with my daughter, she's already at home, safe, but I saw a girl who looked absolutely terrified. Someone was pulling her into an SUV, a black SUV with tinted windows. It just didn't feel right. I tried to go over there, but the vehicle sped off." Jason's pulse quickened. "Can I see the footage?" Daniel handed over his phone. The video was shaky and dark, taken from a distance, but Jason could make out enough to see a young girl resisting as someone in dark clothing urged her into the back seat of a large vehicle. The black SUV looked eerily similar to the one Jason had seen idling near the side exit. The camera then swerved, and the image became distorted as Daniel apparently tried to move closer but lost his grip on the phone for a second. By the time it refocused, the SUV's taillights were disappearing down the road. Jason handed the phone back. He felt a jolt of confirmation that his suspicions were not baseless. "Did you see the driver? Or get a plate number?" Daniel shook his head. "I was too far away. And I was more concerned about my daughter's safety in that moment. By the time I got anywhere near, they were gone." Jason nodded. "I understand. Listen, you did the right thing in documenting it. Can you share this footage with me?" He explained that he wanted to give it to mall management, and possibly the authorities if it could be verified and if they could identify the vehicle. Daniel readily agreed. As they stood there, a hush seemed to fall between them, overshadowing the background noise of shoppers and the clatter of trays in the food court. Daniel said quietly, "I don't know what exactly is going on, but I can't just ignore it. That little girl looked so scared. I have a daughter of my own, if someone ever took her." His voice trembled, and he didn't finish his thought. "I understand," Jason replied, placing a hand gently on Daniel's shoulder to offer some comfort. "I've had suspicions myself about activities around here. Let's work together, keep an eye out, and maybe gather more evidence. If we show up with just this video, well, it's important, but they might call it inconclusive. We need something that proves there's a pattern." Daniel nodded, relief mingling with the worry in his eyes. "Tell me what you need me to do." Over the following days, the two men formed an informal alliance. Jason kept his ear to the ground, continued his careful observation, and told Daniel to alert him if he spotted anything suspicious during his shopping trips. Daniel, who was unemployed at the time, spent more hours at the mall than he cared to admit. He found odd jobs online that let him keep flexible hours, which in turn allowed him to patrol different sections of Westfield Mall at various times. Sometimes, he would pretend to be browsing, occasionally purchasing small items to remain inconspicuous. Other times he would sit in the food court, carefully watching the comings and goings of families. He started to notice the same men in dark jackets or hoodies, blending into the crowds, yet always keeping an eye on vulnerable-looking children. Jason, for his part, recorded everything he could in a small notebook he kept in his uniform pocket: suspicious handoffs, approximate times, physical descriptions of the adults, and the possible direction they left in if he lost them in the corridors. He also kept track of license plate numbers of any SUV that matched the description, although most times the suspicious one had tinted windows and either no visible plate or an out-of-state plate that made it hard to trace. A growing sense of urgency settled over Jason, who found himself losing sleep at night. He kept imagining Mia's terrified face, those wide eyes that had pleaded for help. He wondered if she was still out there, waiting for rescue, or if something even more terrible had happened to her. The enormity of the possibility weighed on him. Occasionally, he would dream of the mall's corridors stretching endlessly, filled with anonymous figures whispering secrets he could not quite hear. One evening, he finally convinced Valerie to take a more proactive stance. He showed her Daniel's footage and explained the recurring presence of the black SUV. Valerie frowned, her brow creasing in concern. She could no longer dismiss Jason's claims outright, but she remained cautious. "I'll talk to the police liaison," she said. "But I'm warning you, they'll want concrete evidence of child abduction or endangerment. This video might not be enough unless we have a positive ID on the girl or a license plate." Jason felt a hint of vindication that his supervisor was at least willing to entertain the idea that something was wrong. However, he could also see she was worried about pushing an accusation that could potentially backfire. Mall management disliked any negative publicity that could scare off shoppers. They preferred to handle issues quietly. Jason suspected Valerie's reluctance stemmed partly from an effort to protect the mall's reputation and partly from simple adherence to protocol. Still, it was progress. A few days later, the name Mia resurfaced in a missing person report. Daniel was the one who discovered it first. He had been browsing social media groups where people shared information about missing children. He came across a post by someone claiming that a young girl named Mia had disappeared from a town about an hour's drive away. The post included a photo, and Daniel recognized her immediately as the trembling child from the parking lot footage. He contacted Jason at once. Jason felt his stomach drop. Everything he feared was coming true. He took the information to Valerie, who now had no reason to doubt him. She escalated the matter, informing the authorities that a missing girl named Mia had been seen at Westfield Mall. The police took the information but remained non-committal. They needed more proof than a possible match in a shaky video. Jason found the response maddening, but he tried to remain calm, reminding himself that official procedures often moved at a slower pace. The next breakthrough arrived when Daniel stumbled upon the fact that the traffickers, if that was indeed who they were, seemed to be planning a Wednesday drop. Daniel had overheard a conversation while he was drinking coffee near a closed store. Two men, standing near the shutters, were discussing the drop in low voices. One had said, "We'll have it done by Wednesday at Kenfield Park." The other had nodded and replied, "Better not let the boss down." Daniel had pretended not to hear them, casually scrolling through his phone, but his heart had raced. Immediately, he texted Jason the details. That night, Jason confronted Valerie once more, asking her to share the mall's security camera footage with the authorities. She hesitated. "Jason, you know how squeamish management is about this. They're afraid of lawsuits." He pressed her, his voice breaking slightly with frustration and urgency. "You know as well as I do that a child's life is at stake. Possibly multiple children's lives." Valerie studied him for a moment. She sighed heavily, then finally agreed. "I'll do it. I'll hand over what we have so far. But if this doesn't pan out, Jason..." He finished her thought. "I understand. I'll take responsibility." Valerie nodded. Her eyes had softened a bit, as though she recognized the sincerity and determination in Jason's expression. Together, they gathered some key surveillance footage, children appearing with different adults, the black SUV in the loading zone, and a few moments where it seemed like certain men in dark jackets were loitering suspiciously. They turned everything over to the police. However, the authorities cited the lack of definitive evidence, no license plates clearly visible, no unambiguous footage of a child being forced into a vehicle, so they couldn't proceed with an aggressive operation. They placed the location on a watch list, at best. Jason and Daniel felt the clock ticking. Wednesday was only a day away. If the traffickers were planning something in Canfield Park, there might not be enough time to secure official backup. They decided, with some reluctance, to stake out the park themselves. Jason knew it was a risk. He was acting outside of his professional authority and training, but he couldn't bear the thought of something happening to Mia or any other child because he had played it safe. On the evening before the planned drop, Jason managed to swap shifts with a coworker so he could be free that night. Daniel gathered what limited equipment they had, mostly just their phones, some flashlights, and a vague plan to record anything incriminating and call the police the moment they had concrete proof. Both men felt a simmering anxiety. They tried to figure out how they would recognize the traffickers in the darkness, how they would intervene if something terrible was unfolding. Wednesday arrived like an ominous drumroll. Jason spent the day rechecking the timeline. He tried to guess what hour the traffickers might appear. He also tried to brace himself for the worst. Maybe they'd bring more people, or perhaps they would be armed with objects that could be used for intimidation. Jason forced himself to breathe deeply, reminding himself that his objective was primarily to document and delay, not to confront them in a way that put the children, or themselves, in jeopardy. Night fell over Canfield Park with a deceptive tranquility. Lampposts cast long pools of light on the sidewalks, but large portions of the park lay in shadow. Wide open lawns stretched out around a central pond, and a playground stood at the far edge. During the day, families often brought their kids here to play on the slides and swings, but at night, it was mostly deserted except for the occasional jogger or dog walker. The air was cool, and a slight breeze rustled the leaves on the trees lining the pathway. Jason parked his modest sedan on a street a few blocks away, not wanting to draw attention by leaving his car right outside the park entrance. Daniel did the same. They met at a bench near the center of the park, carefully scanning their surroundings. Every rustle of leaves or distant footstep made them tense. The minutes dragged. The occasional passers-by seemed like innocents, a couple walking their dog, a man in a hoodie jogging by with headphones, two teenagers chatting quietly on a swing. Finally, around an hour after dusk, they saw a figure lurking near the far side of the playground. The shape was tall, wearing a charcoal gray jacket. Jason's heart pounded in his ears. He was fairly certain this was Marcus, the same man he had seen with Mia at the mall. Another figure joined him, exchanging a few muffled words. They appeared to be waiting for someone. With adrenaline coursing through him, Jason motioned for Daniel to move behind a cluster of bushes, where they could observe without being easily seen. Moments later, a vehicle pulled up along the curb adjacent to the park. Even though it was difficult to see in the dark, Jason recognized the distinctive shape of a black SUV. The passenger door opened, and out came a smaller shape, clearly a child. The interior light flickered briefly as if someone else was inside as well. Jason tried to angle himself to see more clearly. His heart seized in his chest when he realized the child was Mia, stumbling forward with obvious reluctance. Her posture told the whole story. She did not want to be there. Marcus walked swiftly to meet them. The second figure who had been standing next to him remained behind, as if acting as a lookout. Jason could almost feel Daniel shaking beside him, a mixture of fury and fear seizing him at the sight of Mia. She was wearing a thin jacket, shivering slightly, her eyes darting around. She looked more frightened than ever. Marcus took her by the arm, leading her away from the SUV. Another individual stepped out of the car, someone Jason didn't recognize. This newcomer began speaking in low tones with Marcus. Though Jason couldn't catch the exact words, it sounded tense, like they were negotiating something. Then Jason saw a gesture, money changing hands. A wad of something, bills, presumably, shifted from the new arrival's hand into Marcus's palm. Mia whimpered audibly. She tried to pull away, but Marcus held her tight. Jason glanced at Daniel, who was already pulling out his phone to record. Jason did the same, trying to capture as much of the exchange as possible. He whispered, "We need them on record. Then we call the police." The men seemed close to completing whatever transaction they were making, which struck Jason as horrifyingly cold. He braced himself. If they left with Mia in that SUV, there might be no second chance. Time was ticking down like an invisible stopwatch in his mind. Daniel whispered, "Now?" His voice trembled. Jason nodded. "Yeah, I think it's time," he said under his breath. The plan had been to record enough to prove criminal activity, then call the police as soon as it was unambiguous. And it certainly looked unambiguous now. An exchange of money, a terrified child, an obviously clandestine meeting. Jason's phone was already dialing. He prayed they would arrive fast enough. But the call would take time, and the men were ready to move. Mia looked like she was about to be led away from the park, possibly into another vehicle or deeper into the shadows. Jason's instincts screamed that he had to do something. He emerged from behind the bushes, making an effort to keep his voice steady as he addressed Marcus and the other individual. "Let the girl go," he called out, holding his phone in a way that made it clear he was filming. Marcus whirled around, eyes blazing with anger and alarm. "Who are you?" he demanded. Then he recognized Jason from the mall. "You," he snarled. Daniel appeared at Jason's side. "We've already called the police," Daniel announced. "They're on their way. Let her go, or you'll be in even worse trouble." The second man took a step back, glancing around as if calculating an escape route. The air felt charged with tension. Mia stood there, trembling, her eyes moving between Jason and Daniel with a mix of hope and fear. Marcus, however, didn't release her. He tightened his grip, practically dragging her in front of him. His voice was low and menacing. "Stay back," he warned, "or she's the one who'll suffer." He raised his free hand as if to strike or hurt the girl if they got too close. Jason's stomach twisted. He glanced at Daniel, who looked equally terrified and enraged. They had no real weapons, no training in how to handle a hostage situation, and absolutely no intention of letting Mia be harmed. They tried to inch closer, but Marcus hissed, "I said stay back." "I'll do it." Jason and Daniel stopped, hands raised to show they meant no immediate harm. Their objective was to stall, to keep Mia alive and safe until the police arrived. Jason tried to keep his voice calm. "Marcus, you don't want to do this. You'll make everything worse for yourself if you hurt her." Marcus sneered. "Worse than what? You have no idea what you're dealing with." There was a slight tremor in his words, though. Perhaps he hadn't expected to be confronted so openly. Daniel swallowed hard. "We know enough," he said. "You're trading children. That's enough to put you and your whole ring away for a long time." Marcus threw back his head in a mocking laugh, though it had an edge of panic to it. "You think I'm the top of this chain? I'm nobody. There are bigger people out there. People who will do anything to protect their interests." Jason's breath came in quick bursts. He could hear distant sirens. Relief warred with fear inside him. "We're not letting you leave with her," he stated, voice firm. The second man looked at Marcus. "We have to go," he said urgently, glancing at the SUV. The driver inside the vehicle started the engine, no doubt ready to peel away if needed. Marcus's eyes darted between Jason, Daniel, and the approaching sirens. Desperation contorted his features. He yanked Mia close, practically using her as a shield. "If the police come any closer, you know what happens," he snarled. "I'm taking her with me." Daniel's face was taut with rage and fear. "Please," he said, his voice cracking. "Don't. She's just a kid." Marcus sneered but seemed uncertain. Time was slipping away. The sirens grew louder. Suddenly, bright beams of headlights flooded the park entrance as several official vehicles arrived. Officers poured out, though they kept a safe distance, evidently wary of making any sudden moves that might put Mia in further danger. For a few excruciating minutes, a standoff ensued. Marcus backed up, trying to edge toward the SUV, but the police formed a perimeter. Tension hung thick in the air. Mia was crying softly, tears streaking her cheeks. Jason could scarcely breathe. Every second felt like a gamble with the girl's life. Eventually, specialized units moved in, wearing protective gear and carrying specialized equipment, but no references to firearms were made visible. They advanced methodically, positioning themselves to block any escape routes. Marcus realized he was cornered. He let out a guttural curse and hoisted Mia's small form in front of him. Jason could see the panic in the man's eyes, a trapped animal look. It seemed he was trying to think of a way out, but none existed. One of the unit members, a negotiator, stepped forward carefully and began speaking in a calm, practiced tone. "Marcus, let the child go. We can talk this out. There's still a chance to do the right thing." His voice was steady, unwavering. "You know you won't get away if you hurt her." Marcus was breathing heavily. He cast a furious glance at Jason and Daniel. "You fools!" he spat. "You ruined everything." Jason stepped forward, ignoring the negotiator's concerned gesture, and spoke softly. "Marcus, you don't have to do this. Think about her. She's just a little girl. This is your last chance to stop things from getting even worse." Marcus hesitated, his fist still raised. Jason could see in the man's eyes a flurry of emotions: anger, fear, desperation. Then, with a choke sound, Marcus shoved Mia away from him. She stumbled, fell to the ground, and immediately scrambled away, sobbing. The specialized unit seized the moment, rushing forward. In the blink of an eye, they subdued Marcus and pinned him to the ground, incapacitating him without employing any firearms. The other man tried to run for the SUV, but officers intercepted him. The driver, realizing escape was impossible, stopped the engine and put his hands up. Jason and Daniel rushed to Mia's side, helping her up gently. She clung to Jason's arm, trembling so hard he could feel the vibrations through his uniform sleeve. He held her close, telling her, "It's over now, Mia. You're safe." She let out a wail of relief and fear, tears pouring down her cheeks. Police officers began swarming the area, arresting the suspects, searching the SUV, and cordoning off the scene. Jason found himself sinking to his knees beside Mia, letting her bury her face against his chest. He felt tears sting his own eyes, the tension of the moment overwhelming him. Daniel stood beside them, tears in his eyes as well. He whispered, "Thank God." In the ensuing hours, the police uncovered evidence that the group holding Mia was part of a larger trafficking ring that targeted children in public spaces, malls, parks, even streets. They faked or forged custody documents, using them to deflect suspicion whenever they were questioned. Several other children had already been taken, some from other cities, possibly from broken homes or families that were too intimidated to question the documentation. It was a horrifying network, one that Westfield Mall had unwittingly become a hub for. The resolution of that night, however, was only the tip of the iceberg. Investigators launched a sweeping operation, armed with the testimonies of Jason, Daniel, and the newly freed Mia. Over the following days, more arrests were made. Child Protective Services identified several missing children who were recovered from hidden locations, often just outside the city. The operation had extended beyond state lines, and it emerged that some children were being funneled out of the country with phony passports and documents. The ring's reach was staggering. In the midst of these discoveries, Jason found himself in a whirlwind of media attention. His name, along with Daniel's, splashed across local news headlines. Interview requests came pouring in. Some praised Jason as a hero. Others questioned whether mall security had known more than they admitted about suspicious activities. Valerie, Jason's supervisor, faced criticism for what appeared to be initial dismissals of Jason's concerns. Rumors spread that she had been pressured by mall management to keep any negative stories under wraps, which only fueled the public's anger. Valerie eventually resigned amid mounting backlash, leaving Jason with mixed feelings. He had never wanted to see his supervisor's career destroyed, but he couldn't ignore that her reluctance had nearly cost Mia and possibly other children their freedom and safety. The mall itself took a massive reputational hit, with shoppers and the public outraged that such a horrific scheme could have been operating inside what was supposed to be a safe environment. Meanwhile, Mia was placed into foster care. Her birth parents had not been located, and it was suspected that the traffickers had separated her from her family some time ago. Child Protective Services were hopeful that, with the ongoing investigation, her true family could be found. In the meantime, she needed therapy and a loving foster home to begin healing from the trauma she had suffered. Jason and Daniel visited her regularly, bringing small gifts or just spending time talking to her. At first, Mia was quiet, withdrawn, and easily startled, but gradually she began to relax around them. She even managed a few smiles when they told jokes or funny stories. As more details emerged about the extent of the trafficking ring, the FBI took over certain aspects of the investigation. Officials learned that some of the children were about to be shipped out of the country using illegitimate paperwork. A tip led them to a private airfield not far away, where one of the ring's accomplices was scheduled to take a child onto a small plane bound for an international location. Acting on the tip, agents rushed to the airfield. By the time they arrived, the plane was minutes from departure, but they managed to block the runway. Another tense standoff followed, with the traffickers threatening to harm the child if they couldn't leave. However, in a carefully executed maneuver, the FBI team rescued the child and apprehended the criminals. Jason and Daniel only learned of this rescue through the news, but their hearts soared when they heard that another child had been saved, thanks to the break in the case that began with Mia's rescue. In the weeks that followed, law enforcement worked tirelessly to dismantle every facet of the operation. The media continued to highlight Jason and Daniel's role. They interviewed the foster parents who had taken Mia in, capturing a glimpse of the shy girl who was now on the road to recovery. Jason watched these segments late at night, still in disbelief that he had played such a key role in uncovering a hidden evil. The mall fired several security personnel who had overlooked suspicious activities or falsified reports. There was a general outcry for better training and more accountability. A wave of new policies was introduced, including more stringent checks for adults accompanied by children who didn't appear to be their legal guardians, though the specifics faced legal scrutiny. Jason found himself at the center of it all. Some corporate voices blamed him for attracting negative attention, while others lauded him as an example of moral courage. He tried to remain focused on what mattered, Mia's safety and that of all the children who had been victimized. Eventually, Mia began to speak more openly. She told a social worker how she had been taken from a relative's home under false pretenses, how the traffickers had threatened her and other kids. She mentioned that Marcus was not the only man who had guarded her. There were others, all part of a rotating schedule meant to keep the children disoriented and powerless. Hearing these stories tore at Jason's soul, but it also solidified his resolve. He wanted to ensure that no child would ever have to endure such horror again. During this period, Jason developed a friendship with Daniel that went beyond their initial alliance. They often met for coffee, discussing not just the case but their personal lives, their fears, and their dreams for the future. Daniel admitted he had always felt a calling to protect people, but he had never acted on it. "I'm a father," Daniel said, "but I always felt like I should do more, beyond just my own family." "You know?" Jason nodded. He understood the sentiment. He himself had considered joining law enforcement in the past but had been daunted by the lengthy process and the potential dangers. Now, after having come face to face with evil in such a direct way, he realized that the risk was worth it if it meant saving lives. In time, Daniel followed through on his desire. He walked to the local police station one morning, determination etched on his features. He told Jason beforehand that he intended to sign up for training, to channel his experiences into a career where he could make a difference. Jason fully supported him, offering a handshake and a heartfelt "Good luck." They both knew the road ahead was long, but there was a sense of hope that came from having turned tragedy into meaningful change. Mia remained the brightest spot in all of this. Whenever Jason and Daniel visited, she seemed a little happier, a little more trusting of the world. She was still timid around strangers and loud noises, but she no longer looked over her shoulder every few seconds. On one visit, she drew them a crayon picture of 3 stick figures, Jason, Daniel, and Mia, standing outside the mall with sun overhead. She gave it to Jason with a small smile, and he promised to keep it forever. The day finally came when the biggest arrests were announced on national news. The ringleaders, high up in the chain, had been apprehended in a neighboring state. It was a moment of triumph that led to a collective sigh of relief among law enforcement, advocacy groups, and the public who had been following the story. Jason watched the televised press conference from his living room, tears in his eyes, as an FBI spokesperson thanked the courageous citizens who first brought the situation to light. Though they did not name him and Daniel specifically on air, he knew who they were referring to. With the largest threats now dismantled, life began to assume a semblance of normalcy. The media frenzy subsided, and the mall gradually returned to its usual bustle. Jason continued his duties, though he noticed that management now insisted on more thorough training for new hires, including mandatory seminars on identifying human trafficking indicators. While some might see these measures as too little, too late, Jason regarded them as a step in the right direction. The last part of the story was, in many ways, the quietest. It involved Jason's own introspection, the emotional aftermath of what he had experienced. He recognized how the ordeal had changed him. He was no longer the wide-eyed new guard who thought his job entailed little more than checking bags or chasing down shoplifters. He had seen a darkness that existed beneath the surface of everyday life and discovered that, with courage and conviction, it could be confronted. He also recognized the power of standing up for what was right, even when it meant facing disbelief or institutional resistance. People had tried to dismiss him or discourage him from meddling in affairs they considered beyond his jurisdiction, but he had persisted. In doing so, he not only saved a life, several lives in fact, but also tore a hole in the fabric of a criminal operation that had seemed too large and elusive to tackle. Sometimes, on his days off, Jason would drive to the nearby foster home where Mia was staying. He would bring her little gifts, a stuffed animal, a coloring book, or sometimes just a silly greeting card to make her laugh. He tried to show her that the world could also be filled with kindness. Slowly, she became more talkative. She began attending therapy sessions, and her foster parents reported progress. One afternoon, she hugged Jason without trembling, a small but poignant victory in her long journey of healing. Daniel, too, remained deeply involved. Though he was busy with preliminary classes and training sessions at the police academy, he made time to check on Mia. Sometimes, he and Jason would coordinate visits so they could see her together. She had come to think of them both as protective figures who had appeared in her darkest moment. For Jason, the experience awakened paternal feelings he had never fully acknowledged before. He often wondered if he might have a family someday, children of his own, whom he would shield from the kinds of nightmares Mia had faced. As the months went by, courts heard the cases of those arrested. Long trials loomed, but the evidence was overwhelming. Document forgeries, eyewitness accounts, video footage, and the testimonies of rescued children built an ironclad case. Convictions were all but guaranteed, ensuring that many of those involved would spend decades in prison. Advocacy groups formed around the crisis, working in tandem with the newly established protocols in public areas like malls and theme parks. The entire city's perspective shifted. People became more vigilant, more aware of the subtle signs of child trafficking. Awareness campaigns sprouted, featuring checklists of indicators, phone hotlines, and training seminars for employees in high-traffic areas. Meanwhile, Jason often reflected on how everything had started with that single moment, when he had seen Mia's terrified face and hesitated. He had almost dismissed it as a child overreacting, but a gut feeling had kept him from turning away completely. That was all it took, one flicker of empathy, one refusal to ignore the silent plea in her eyes, for the entire operation to unravel. In some sense, he felt a measure of guilt that he had not acted even sooner, but he tried to remind himself that ultimately, they had succeeded. On a crisp autumn morning, a small event was held in the city square, recognizing individuals who had contributed to the dismantling of the trafficking ring. Jason and Daniel were invited to attend. They arrived in modest attire, not expecting any grand recognition. They were more interested in seeing if Mia could be there, but they had been told it wasn't likely, given her foster parents' concerns about exposing her to too much public attention. So, they waited in the crowd, listening politely to speeches by local officials, child welfare advocates, and law enforcement representatives. Toward the end of the ceremony, however, a surprise was announced. One of the speakers called Jason and Daniel to the front. "We'd like to honor two men," the speaker said, "whose courage and persistence helped save numerous children from a terrible fate. Jason Hale and Daniel Cross, would you come forward?" The crowd clapped. Jason felt his cheeks redden, and Daniel looked equally taken aback. They stepped up to the small platform. The speaker presented them with plaques, each with a simple inscription thanking them for their service to the community. Jason felt an odd mix of pride and humility as he held the plaque in his hands. "I don't know what to say," he murmured into the microphone. "I was just doing what anyone should do." Daniel nodded. "Same here," he said. "I'm just a dad who saw a little girl in danger. I couldn't just walk away." They stepped off the stage to the applause of the crowd, most of whom did not know the full story behind the fear, the sleepless nights, or the moral dilemmas they had faced. Still, it felt like a tangible acknowledgement that justice had prevailed in the end. As the ceremony wound down, Jason and Daniel slipped away from the crowd. They caught sight of a figure watching them from a distance. It was Mia, standing hand in hand with her foster mother, smiling timidly. Jason raised a hand in greeting. Mia waved back. She didn't run up to them. Her foster mother had probably advised caution around crowds, but her expression said enough. She was safe, she was healing, and she was grateful. That silent exchange, more than the plaque or the applause, felt like the true reward for everything they had gone through. In the days that followed, Jason continued working at the mall, although his sense of purpose had evolved dramatically. He wasn't just a security guard looking to clock in and out. He was a guardian of sorts, aware that the world could hide dark corners, even in the most ordinary places. He was more watchful, more prepared to intervene if he saw something amiss. The difference now was that his entire team had grown more vigilant as well. Valerie's replacement made it a priority to brief everyone on child protection protocols. Jason found a semblance of hope in that shift, a sense that the tide had turned, at least in their corner of the city. Daniel, too, persevered in his training. He texted Jason updates. "I passed my physical exam," or "I'm studying for the written test tomorrow, wish me luck." Jason always replied with hearty congratulations or words of encouragement. Their bond, forged in crisis, held steady as they moved on to new chapters in their lives. There were moments of solemnity, though, especially when they met children who were not as lucky as Mia, children who had been rescued but were so deeply traumatized they could barely speak. Jason understood that the operation they helped break apart was only one piece of a larger problem. Still, every step forward was a victory. Every child freed was an unquantifiable success. Some evenings, Jason would sit alone in his small apartment, the city lights flickering outside the window. He would think about how everything began with a single moment of empathy. If he had walked away that day, or if he had believed Marcus's documentation without question, an entire ring of criminals might still be operating. The thought scared him but also emboldened him. It proved that one person's willingness to act could make a difference, even against a hidden web of darkness. When the day finally arrived for Daniel to sign his final forms at the police station, Jason accompanied him there. They stood on the steps outside, the grand stone facade reminding them of the seriousness of the world Daniel was about to enter. Daniel took a deep breath, adjusting the collar of his shirt. Jason patted him on the back. "Go do it," he said with a smile. "Thanks," Daniel replied, returning the smile. He looked up at the building. "I owe this in part to you. If we hadn't worked together, I might still be wandering around, not sure of my purpose. Now I know." Jason nodded, feeling a surge of pride and friendship. He watched as Daniel walked through the double doors, his posture steady, eyes forward. Perhaps, Jason thought, there were many more battles to fight. But for now, at least, they had won a crucial one. In a way, the final chapter of their story was not an ending but a new beginning, new responsibilities, a new determination to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, and a renewed faith that justice, while sometimes slow and arduous, could indeed triumph when good people refused to look away. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.